Hello and welcome to today's McMaster University Continuing Education Caregiving Essentials webinar, All in the Family, Caregiving Changes Everything. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we reside. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it's located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. My name is Erin, and I'll be your host on behalf of McMaster Continuing Education. Today, I'm joined by our facilitators, Donna Thompson and Zachary White. Donna Thompson is the author of The Four Walls of My Freedom, Lessons I've Learned from a Life of Caregiving. She is a consultant and speaker on issues relating to family caregiving, disability, and aging. Donna is a patient and family advisor on health research and policy, and she teaches family caregivers in Canada how to advocate for care in the hospital as well as in the community. She blogs regularly at the Caregivers Living Room. Donna is the facilitator of Caregiving Essentials and Infection Prevention and Control for caregivers and families, both of which are free online courses for family caregivers. And now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. White. He earned his PhD in communication from Purdue University and is an associate professor and interim dean in the James L. Knight School of Communication at Queen's University of Charlotte. Dr. White's research and teaching focus on helping people manage meaning and communicate challenging life experiences in the middle of high levels of uncertainty and stress. He's the co-author with Donna of the book, The Unexpected Journey of Caring, the Transformation from Loved One to Caregiver. And now, Donna, I'll hand things over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I am delighted to be here with my BFF and co-author, Dr. Zachary White. Zachary, you and I were just chatting briefly before we kicked off today about the fact that we talk to caregivers all the time. You and I are deeply embedded in a lot of online caregiving support groups, and that most of the time, most of the people in those groups have identified their biggest challenge being a lack of family support, that it hurts when families don't understand automatically without a roadmap of just how hard caregiving can be. We hear so often that in parental caregiving, one sibling has stepped up, others are missing in action. And so you and I, in putting this presentation together, have really thought a lot about what happens in the family when someone develops caregiving needs, and why does it change families so fundamentally? So Zachary, over to you.
That's so true, Donna, and welcome to everyone. Thank you to Caregiving Essentials for providing this forum for us to talk about what Donna highlights as kind of the unexpected experience that's behind the scenes of the caregiving experience, whether you've been caring for someone for a short period of time or you're in the midst of a chronic caregiving situation. What Donna says is so important to understand. And I know that we all have our lived experiences that we bring forward to this interaction today. So draw upon your own family experiences, because Donna and I are not going to talk from an experience of we have the answer to make your family perfect. Not that we would ever desire. For every family, there's ways of being that work for us and our families. And so we're simply going to provide, hopefully, an understanding of why caregiving is a challenge, not just to you and your loved one, but to the entire system of your family, and thinking about ways around and through as we navigate the experiences that you're talking about, Donna, in terms of, when someone brings a member into their family, there's a celebration, there's a marker, there's a ritual, there's acknowledgement. But for all of us here today, wherever we are in our caregiving journey, there are oftentimes the invisible experiences of beginnings and changes and endings that no one else will make note of and no one else draws attention to. And so that is something that I think we want to talk about today. And as Donna mentioned at the very beginning, feel free to make this interactive. Ask a question in the chat box. We will draw attention to that. We might even ask for some examples along the way if you feel comfortable. But Donna, I mean, you hit on this. Caregiving is a family crisis. It is a family crisis in addition to the unending 24/7 experiences that some of us devote to our loved ones for a variety of caregiving needs and resources and that go on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When we say the word family crisis, that is in no way, Donna, like a failure, right? We're not saying that people are a failure because caregiving is in their family and a part of their landscape. It really just means that, your family, this group of people connected by genetics, by love, by bonds, by choice, by situation, can no longer work and act in the ways that they used to.
Mhm. And what it makes me think of too, Zachary, is part of the before caregiving operating system in the family. It was so predictable. And it makes me think that, I remember reading that in case of Alzheimer's or dementia or other progressive neurological diseases, that you have to reintroduce yourself to your loved one every day. And you have to reintroduce your loved one to the world every day when there's a changing cognition, and cognitive losses. And this, if you think for 1 second, like, just what does that do to the whole family in terms of the stress of the unpredictable? Like you said, if, it's just not anything we have practice with, or it's naturally a crisis.
It's invisible. It's hard to point to. It's not something you pay attention to in the beginning of your caregiving situation, in which the crisis and urgency of the moment of the feeding tube or the wheelchair or the medication or helping someone go to the bathroom or take care of just bodily needs. These are things that take precedent, as they should, but lurking always in the background of every experience of caregiving is family and the ways in which we make sense of our experiences. And Donna and I are so passionate about this. We wrote a whole book about it because the way we make sense of our experiences actually shapes the way that we understand how we care and the value that we see for ourselves and the ways that we belong with our family. And so we're talking about, it's hard to put hard to put a stamp on, but hopefully we'll bring it to life in a variety of ways. And so as you read this question, this is not, once again, a question that's trying to indict any of us, because it's more of a question of just to help us think. Adaptability is a theme that Donna and I are going to talk about throughout our hour with you today. And so in your minds, as we focus on this question in the red box here, it's just a moment of reflection, not because if you're not that adaptable it's not an indictment of anything, but have you modified your family roles and expectations since caregiving? And for some of us, that may be hard to remember, Donna, life before caregiving, right? So some of us might take a moment, but when we say modified your family roles, are you doing different things? But not only are you doing different things, which we can almost guarantee you are, but are you thinking about your own role and value in the family? And does that change also how others' roles in your family are being played out since the caregiving experience kind of took over or became an essential part of your family?
Yeah. And Zachary, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Gehane has made a very astute observation, just saying that the grief of losing a person you love progressively, in the case of a disease like Alzheimer's, it takes an emotional toll when you're living with grief, ongoing grief, complex trauma. And I just, posted in the chat box my reflection on that. Yes, it is. And it makes adaptation and change much harder when you're in the midst of grieving.
No doubt about it. And Hannah, thanks so much for sharing that, because most people, when they talk about grief, they talk about it as kind of a physical body. We're talking about that, but also, you're not grieving the death of someone necessarily as much as the grieving roles and experiences that you once had with your family that may be different. And so it's oftentimes a kind of private experience of grief that is hard to communicate, or even help others closest to you explain, even the person you're caring for. And so these two questions about family roles and stories just kind of are foreshadowing what we're going to talk about. And as was highlighted, this is not something that is necessarily easy at all. It's just, we're highlighting an opportunity to think about the benefits of adaptability as it pertains to the ways we embody our roles and the ways we talk about our experiences. So the research tells us that adaptable families are just more capable of coping and responding to high levels of change. And, Don, I'm not sure that that will surprise anyone, other than in the front of our mind as we go, yes, that's true, probably. And yet, I don't know if that's possible within my family. But this second box here, I think, is so important too, because adaptability is not good for adaptability's sake, but it allows us to think about new and different ways of being, of relating, and talking about our experiences.
Yeah. Antonia, well, we have some very interesting comments here. Linda T says, also when giving birth to a baby with disabilities, grieving the loss of one's baby without disabilities. That's something, certainly as the mother of a child with disabilities, I've, given a lot of thought to. But Gehenna has also mentioned, it's the combination of love and necessity is often what drives our adaptation. We have no choice but to adapt to new realities. And I think that's also part of the reason where you have some people adapting and some people clinging on to the old operating systems. That can cause a lot of stress in the family. And Antonia has said, there is also a transition that we go through as our personal identities become redefined over and over again. That is so true. And we're going to talk about how every person in the family experiences a continuous redefining of their roles in the family. And, this is fundamentally changing all the time in ways that are very difficult to understand as you're going through. But I think these are worth reflecting on so that we begin to feel some sense of control over what the heck is happening in my family. And everybody, like you say, Zachary, every family is going to experience this differently.
Yeah, what is happening to me, and how am I evaluating myself and thinking about my experiences in terms of my own value and compassion towards myself, so that that opportunity for resilience, especially in an ongoing care situation, probably the most important thing that all of us can glean, because it goes day from day to day. And one of the things we love so much about these webinars is we learn, like, our participants here are providing so much insight as we go. And so thanks for flagging those, Donna. So let's jump in, right? I mean, every family has roles. Every family has relationships. I don't care if your family's functional or dysfunctional, been together for 1 year, or the entirety of your life. However you define your family, all families we know have roles and relationships. So if that's a given, one way to kind of put our feet in the water here to think about how care may have reshaped our roles and relationships is just to think about, what was one of your main family roles before caregiving? No doubt you had multiple, but if you had to kind of, your primary or your main caregiving, your main role before caregiving, once again, that term before caregiving, you might have to think. So take a moment, and if you would, put it in the chat. Were you the handy person, the financial person, the organized one, the listener, the breadwinner? Donna, but before caregiving, what would be your primary role that you would name?
I'm thinking maybe peacekeeper. If somebody was having an argument in my family, I would say, Now, everybody calm down. And also, caregiver, I've always been drawn to that role. Um, in terms of my own family, my father, when I was a teenager, had 3 strokes. I helped to look after my mother, who was looking after my father, living at home, took over the cooking then. So yeah, caregiver probably too.
Yeah. So if you don't feel comfortable writing in the chat, write it down, because we're going to do a compare and contrast here for a moment, just for your own benefit, just to give you an opportunity to think about how you may have evolved in terms of your relationships. So
Again, we're asking Zachary who you were in your family before
yes,
caregiving.
before
That's the
caregiving,
question.
yes, before caregiving. So before caregiving, and then if you would, what would you say one of your main roles is now in the midst of caregiving? Now, clearly, caregiving may be the most central and dominant role that you have. But, sometimes, Donna, we oftentimes talk about where someone, a partner that may have been the financial person, and now that they are no longer capable of that, the caregiver also takes on the role of the financial person. And so that may not be a role that they ever thought that they would take on. They don't want to do it, but they find them that by necessity thrust into that situation.
That's right. And I think we evolve into these
Yeah.
roles more by our interests and talents before caregiving, and our nature, our personality. But then, as Gehane says, after caregiving, we don't necessarily choose a role. Sometimes we're forced into
Yeah.
roles that we don't like, that we're not good at, which is obviously very stressful. I know that when I had to do my mother's paperwork, I hate doing my own. I'm not good at it. It stresses me out. I hate math. And so, I had to do some of that for my mom. And I think that's what you're trying to get at,
Yep.
Gehane. And I feel your pain.
Two things you say,
choose
there's
these.
no choice is taken away, and you can also say that they multiply. And so that they multiply and compound at the same time. Whereas you might be able to focus or name yourself as defined by, and clearly in the midst in your roles now, it's always situated within the bounds of caregiver, probably as a defining feature of your additional roles. And so you have these kind of before and now roles or roles in your family. What we want to get across is not that focusing on the role before and after as much as how does this role change what is expected of you? Like when you add this caregiver to the financial, or you have you turned from the peacekeeper to the financial person. Well, what does that do in terms of what you expect of yourself? Because I think, Donna, we don't ask this question very much. We take on by necessity and need. That's one of the kind of clear criteria of a caregiver, is like, I do what is necessary, whether I want to or not, whether I chose this or not. But how does it shape? How do you think that might shape what's expected of someone, Donna, in terms of these kinds of change in roles or the multiplication of roles?
I think we judge ourselves on a completely different standard than we would judge other people, or even ourselves, at different times in our life in different contexts, like in a paid job. It's weird to me, but a lot of people I know, and I'm guilty of this too, we believe that if we love someone enough, we should be able to do everything well. And we should be able to do it all by ourselves. And if we don't, it's a failure of love and loyalty. And we would never judge ourselves on this basis in other contexts, like at work, at school. Like, no, you do the best you can, and the best you can is good enough, especially when you're looking at other people and doing their best in a situation. You think, yeah, good on you. if there's 10 more things to do, figure out how to get somebody else to do
Mm.
those other 10 things. Excuse me. But in caregiving, when we're looking at ourselves in these roles and our expectations that we have for ourselves, we are harsh, and too harsh, in my opinion.
I think you're absolutely right. Everything becomes a referendum on ourselves, our value, our capacity, our competence. And I think a large part of that is because we don't have a choice. We know intuitively that every day those tasks aren't ones we can push to the edge of the desk or avoid, that they are required just for the everyday functioning of life. And then it becomes very confusing to separate our assessments of our capacity in one role from another. It's because this role of caregiving kind of shapes so much of how we think of ourselves and that harsh self-criticism that you talk about.
Yeah. And I also think, Jan has shared here in the chat box that she's in a new role, absolutely new role, caregiving for an independent single adult male child of 47 years old who has had a massive and debilitating stroke.
Wow.
And I'm so sorry, Jan. Knowing what happened to my father at age 52, had his first stroke. It's very, very hard. And I think there is a difference in, you know, the perspective that you, or the lens of experience that you put onto these questions.
Mm.
If you're a brand new caregiver with a sudden onset need for caregiving, like a stroke, or a new diagnosis that is very serious, very rapidly progressing, something like that, as opposed to a slower progressive series of losses related maybe to natural aging, for example.
Yeah.
Some things are the same and some things are very different, right?
Yeah, because you're changing, your relationship is changing, and the family system then, and the dynamics that go with that in terms of what you might expect from yourself as it pertains to filling certain family needs or roles. It is remarkably complicated. And so
Yes.
we're trying to make sense of these. To Jan and Gahan's comments earlier, that it's not easy to be adaptable under the best of circumstances, but when you add all these together, it really becomes challenging. And so when we think about kind of family dynamics and family roles, we challenge you just to really kind of write out your roles and think about how they may have evolved, or your own assessments of your self in relationship to those roles. Because at the end of the presentation, Donna might have some suggestions for you in terms of that adaptability doesn't mean that you can do everything all times. And even though that's oftentimes what we feel like as caregivers. So the second point that we want to bring up here in terms of just adaptability, we talked about family roles. Another element, and this is one that maybe we don't think about, like we all tell stories, we all have family stories, and family stories about who we are and who we were and what we value as a family. But surprisingly, family stories can be remarkably helpful in helping us become more adaptable in terms of adjusting and responding to the way things are, not the way things were. We don't give up on the way things were. We still can integrate those into our family stories. But if we think about it for a moment, let's go back to pre-caregiving life if we can. For some of us, that's relatively recent. For some of us, that is a long time in the past. What one story do you think best illustrates you and your family pre-caregiving? Like, the story that you would tell others about who your family is. Donna, you always really do it, like fun-loving family that you describe pre-caregiving. I know caregiving's been with you throughout your life, so that, but what's one story that describes your family pre-caregiving?
Well, the story that comes to mind is my family before I married my husband, because that's when I think of pre-caregiving, because our son
Mhm.
was born with disabilities. So it's hard to think of a
Yeah.
caregiving story of my immediate family. But when I was growing up and before my dad had his strokes and everything, the story I would tell is that my mother was a bit of a wild child, and she was on the front porch in her nightgown having a cigarette with her coffee in the morning. And my father, who was a charming, wonderful, quiet, straight laced guy, said to her, Tootie, her nickname was Tootie, you really shouldn't be out here smoking, in your nightgown, because like the neighbors will see. And my mother uh, took her cigarette and went out to this little tree on our front lawn and did a maypole dance around the tree for the neighbors. That was describing in a
Yeah.
nutshell. And my sister was completely mortified. And so everybody and I was laughing my head off. And so that sort of in a nutshell is a story that described our family before caregiving. And it showed people's essential
Yeah.
natures, but also kind of like their strengths and um, their natural personalities, which changed dramatically after my father's strokes.
No doubt about it. Because, when we say who is a person, who are you? What do you believe in? What stories represent you? We oftentimes, and we kind of get trapped in language here, that we think that they're frozen. We think that I am blank is the same today as it was 5 years ago. And we think that because our stories don't typically evolve until they need to, until they no longer work, until they actually work against us, until they make us feel like strangers in our own experiences, until they make us feel inauthentic. And we have enough challenges. We don't need to feel inauthentic, which I think Gahan and others are getting to. The challenge of caregiving within families is that other family members oftentimes can make us feel out of place because we think we can be most authentic, most real with people. But remember that our family stories may be different than our other members of our family, because they don't need to change their stories if they're not impacted in the same way that our immediate family is. And so we only ask you to think about kind of like what kinds of stories or how you thought of yourself through story form of your family pre-caregiving, to help us get to the idea of this elasticity, that adaptability and family stories are really connected. And this comes down to the fact that we may not be able to change. We cannot change oftentimes the circumstances we're in, but we might be able to modify the stories we tell about our experiences so that we can enable others to be more a part of our lives, to feel more understood, and to find value in our caregiving experiences. Gahan, you say that you think about caregiving as a choice, and that's so important. But even if you feel that caregiving may not be a choice, the values that you glean from caregiving can be your own making. And that gives you some kind of choice and control in ways that I think you're alluding to. So what's one story do you think best illustrates you and your family now since caregiving? And Donna, I know you told so many of these wonderful stories about whether your mother's birthday, for example, or others that you think highlight your family immersed in care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the story that comes to mind is my son Nicholas. He and I communicate very well, even though he is non-speaking. We have codes and he has various strategies that he uses to communicate. And he's a wheelchair user and so forth. So when he was about, I'm going to say 16 or 17, it was Halloween. And he told me that he wanted to dress up and give candy out at the door, but he was too old to go door to door. So I said, okay, fine. And what do you want to dress up as? And he said, I want to dress up as the scariest character I can think of. And I said, great. I'm your mom. I'll fix your costume. That's me being a good mom. What do what's the scariest character you can think of? And he said, you, mom. So I dressed him up as me before my coffee in the morning with a wig and dark circles under his eyes. And and my dressing gown and fuzzy slippers and everything. And he looked like the mother in Psycho, honestly. He scared the he scared the bejesus out of the kids coming to the door. And we thought this was so hilarious. And the next day I had him in Emerge for, I don't know what, one of
Yeah.
1 million raging infections. And I think that shows to me our determination to laugh, to have fun, but that things can turn so quickly into an emergency, from laughter into tears, just so quickly. And so, yeah, that would
Yeah.
be my story for that.
And I love how, so if participants have written down maybe the story pre-caregiving and in the midst of caregiving, let's mimic what Donna did. What do you think that story says about, your life pre-caregiving? What do you think your story now tells about your own experiences now? And I think we need to think about that, Donna, because if we don't, we don't want the story to tell parts of our experiences that don't resonate with who we are. They have to be calibrated, and they help us to know where to mine for values, for markers, for who we have become. The stories are fun and interesting and but also can be tearful and emotional, but they also do something for us. They keep us going. They help us navigate through.
It's the similarity between my first story and my second story that I could say my values are my values. And, there's something essential in me that has not changed.
Yes.
And I kind of can take that, like as Gaheen said, as saying, this is where I am now. I hold on to my values, and that is a choice. And that makes me feel less of a victim.
Yes. That the details of the stories change, but those emergent values remind you there is continuity amidst the evolving you and your family. So powerful. And I hope others find some resonance with that, not because there's a perfect story or a funny story or sad story. We're not talking about that as much as we are. What can you glean? Have you updated stories? It's important to update our stories. We talk about updating our records all the time, and we update our passcodes and all that kind of thing. But the ways in which we update stories that reflect and shape our responses to our experience are so important. And these are questions you might want to write down as you have those two stories. Is the story that you think represents your caregiving life, is it serving you well? Is it serving you well? I mean, I know that's kind of a generic question. John is going to come back to that in a second, but maybe these other two questions might fill in what that means. Does it help you and others make sense of your family situation? This is where stories are glue. They help provide the we-ness. And we need the we-ness of a family when caregiving can create all kinds of stressors and urgencies and chaotic moments. Does it give you meaning of continuity? Like Donna said, from where you were to where and who you are now. Does it provide a way in for others to understand who your family is and is becoming? People may not ever get the details and the specifics of your care situation in the way that you and your family do, but they will be able to come closer with stories that approximate a way in, a kind of open door. We know families who tell stories about their experiences receive more support. We know that families who tell stories about their experiences sense greater connection amongst their family members. We know people who tell stories about their experiences have a greater sense of their own emergent values, which provides them ways to endure and manage the chronic ongoing situations that face them.
Absolutely. That is so true, Zachary.
And when you say, Don, when we ask the question, is your family serving you well? What are we getting at there?
Well, I think the family stories allow people to participate in remembering, and it opens up an opportunity for people to have a role. So like if you sit down with your sisters, brothers, cousins, whoever you're closest to and call family, and ask them these questions. Who are we now? Who are you now? Who are you now? Who are you now? Not just, the story doesn't change for only the family
No.
caregiver and the patient. It changes for everybody. And, you know, I think that it's worth asking these questions in the family because, you know, we were talking before this webinar started, Zachary, just about how when, say, other members of the family aren't stepping up to help.
Yeah.
And, you know, what a lot of people say, which is completely natural to their family members, is like, I am overwhelmed. And you're nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, I'm upset because you're not calling, you're not coming, you're not helping. And this is very common. And, you know, I was saying earlier, like, sometimes, you know, if you're presenting yourself as overwhelmed, effectively what you're doing is inviting other people to be overwhelmed with you. And naturally, people run as fast as they can away from you, if that's the case. But I think if you begin from a different starting point and say, who are we now as a family? People can begin to take, they can be invited to take a role that potentially is not overwhelming. So these family stories can serve as glue, but also as invitations to participate in the family in a way that's helpful.
So well put. So well put.
So, you know, in thinking about the family, and what are some of the other factors when somebody develops care needs that can really rock the boat of who are we? My day, which is normally private and normally according to my choices of whether I have tea, coffee, whether I laugh or cry. These can be very impacted when home care workers enter into the home and begin to take over responsibilities that are intimate, private. They come between a husband and a wife, a mother and a daughter. This is essentially a stranger who has entered your most private spaces. And how does that impact a family? I can tell you, in needing home help with our son over many years, our son Nicholas lived with us at home in what I would describe as a home ICU type setting with a lot of nursing care. And when people would come in to help care for him, I always felt like my husband and I could never fight. You know, it was like it changed our relationship. And sometimes the need for respite was just so that we could have an argument and talk plainly to each other. In a way, having somebody in your home, um, if you're one of those people who cleans up for a cleaning lady, like I do, you know, you think, oh my God, like there's dirty clothes on the floor and oh no, they're going to think I'm a terrible housekeeper. I'm a terrible person. All of these things change the way families operate. And on that basis, a lot of people say no to the idea of a stranger coming in to give care. Not to mention that in the case of parental relationships or spousal relationships, you can feel that a person who is a personal support worker or nurse is taking over your role as in the family. That can happen. I have thought about that quite a bit. There's something sacred about home and family and the way we work together to meet all of our needs. And when somebody's needs become caregiving needs, And we do need outside support. We have to really figure out, we need time alone to be a family. How do we be a family? How do we incorporate our family stories when strangers become part of our family due to care needs? So, and then the next slide, if you go to the next slide, yeah. So this is a huge question for families, not least because a lot of families who have a relative in long-term care, a lot of us were locked out during COVID. And we're trying to be a family through 3 panes of glass, when in window visits. Like that is, that was very, very difficult uh, for me personally, with our son not being able to see him. Um, when my mother had her 90th birthday in her assisted living home, I remember, the cousins came, my sister, my husband, my brother-in-law, everybody was there, and we had a party for my mom. And we sort of took one room that was off the dining room, but they weren't separated by a door. And we loved the people who ran that home. But on this day, they came up to me and my sister and said, "You're laughing too loud." And other people, they might be sad because you're having so much fun. I just thought, what in the holy heck, right? How? And I said, I remember the words came out of my mouth, like, how are we supposed to be a family if we
Wow.
can't celebrate and laugh on my mother's big birthday? So
That's
that's
so
what I'm
powerful.
talking about here. I
Yes.
did make a stand. I said,
Yeah.
I'm sorry if people are sad, but that is not on me today. No.
It's added complexities you're highlighting to the sense of trying to reconcile who your family is and how your roles might be in ways that you couldn't have envisioned. And how do you begin to tell stories or create the space to think about the stories that represent or speak of your experiences in ways that help that that's our product, that's us, that lives even amidst these changing circumstances.
Yeah. And long-term care has uh, really changed and responded to this idea of the integrity of families
Mhm.
by creating this designation now of essential family caregiver. But that's had interesting um, implications for family caregivers, because a lot of people I know have been phoned at home and say, you need to, you're the essential caregiver now. You have that designation in the long-term care home, and we're short-staffed. So you need to come in and work.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
common. It's common in the States and it's common in
Yeah.
Canada. So I think we need to be careful
Mhm.
of saying, the essential thing is the family and relationships in the family, and being exploited by underfunded healthcare systems can be just as destructive to the integrity of families. And we need to push back, like
Yeah.
Gahane says, with attitude, a lot of
Right.
attitude to protect ourselves and our
Yes.
loved ones from these threats to our
Yes.
families. So, the question is, how can we get family well-being? How can we, with all of these challenges, how can we um, have peace in our hearts and say the world is at right or rights, and everything is good. I don't feel a sense that something is fundamentally wrong all the time. I'm not in in a state of grief and a state of anxiety all the time. How do we go from a place of chaos to calm in our family? Um, and how can we sort of like figure out a pathway towards that? Um, so if you can go to the next slide, one of the tools that I really love for this effort to figure out, are we okay as a family, and is everybody okay? Um, is this F words tools. So this is a tool to assess family well-being that was developed at McMaster by essentially for children with disabilities and their families. But I often present this F words tool as something that any family can use at any time. It's particularly helpful if caregiving is going on, though. So this is the F words are based on the International Classification of Function from the WHO, from the World Health Organization. And the F words are function, family, fitness, fun, friends, and future. All of the domains of human work, human well-being. And every single person of any age and any health challenge of any sort is going to need to have goals and support in meeting those goals in each of these domains. So what we did in my family, and I invite anybody to go to the canchild.ca website and print this out, stick it on the dining room table over dinner when you're gathered with your family, and say, okay, everybody gets one of these templates to fill out. Everybody gets this paper and a pen and write down, what do you want to do for function? And you can say in the next week, in the next 6 months, in the next year. You can put it whatever time frame you want on it, or just in the present. And you say for function, that might look like work. For function, I want to learn to I want to learn more about Alzheimer's caregiving. Gaheen, you mentioned you wanted to maybe take a course in Alzheimer's caregiving in order to care, for your uncle in the best way possible. And so that might be function. Family. What are your aspirations and goals in your family? And fitness, fun, friends, and future. Here you can think about your hopes and dreams that you need to get a workout break or go for a walk every day. You put that under fitness. That is what I need. But the fantastic thing about the F words tool is that everybody gets to say about what they want and need to do. And then when you look at everybody's, you can say, well, how can I help you get what you need for fun? How can you help me get what I need to be with my friends? And all goals and aspirations are equal. Nobody's is more important than each other's. It's an equal statement of need for well-being. And yeah, Jan, I like your comment. This will be a great idea to change the current F word that is constantly used by our frustrated son to these new F words. Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm sure my son uses the other F word a lot too, and he's non-speaking, but he learned that in high school. He's so proud of himself for saying the other F word. But yes, I have done this with my family, and I got to tell you, it's great because if somebody has a sudden stroke, for example, all of a sudden everybody goes, oh, only their needs are important. But no, everybody has a claim for their basic needs in the family, and everybody can have a role in supporting each other to get what they need under these F words domain. So, and I think that may be the last slide, is it?
Yeah, it is. So one
Okay.
last question on, I know we got just about 1 or 2 more minutes, but what if everyone, again, asks if not everyone wants to take part in the F words collage in the family? What are your suggestions?
Then I think you're going to have to go undercover and get them to participate without realizing they're participating. And so if you ask, say, what do you want to do today? And are you thinking about what do you want? Or here's an example. A birthday is coming up. So if you want to probe a little bit in using these domains yourself with other members who don't want to sit down and do this process, you can be a bit of a spy and collect information. So say in your family, a birthday is coming up. You could say, dad. So say the father in the family doesn't want to do the F words thing. So, but you could say, we have a birthday in the family coming up. Do you want to get together with the whole family? Would that be good or not? Or how do you feel about that? And a person might say, yeah, I want to get together with the family because we haven't been able to get together. And, this is the way I want the family to be for this birthday. So that can give you a clue. And you could go to another room and fill that out for that person, even though just to kind of as a way to keep track. How do people really feel about these domains? Then later on a good day, you could say, how you mentioned the family birthday and what you wanted the family to look like on a special occasion. I have a different idea about what I think the family could look like for me. I want the family to look like. And you can begin to structure conversations around these F words without using the paper is what I'm trying to get at here. But if you've got the guide in your head, you can direct a conversation to get at comparing your views and your needs and your personal goals with other people's in the family. And because everybody will have their goals, because these are essentially human goals, human domains of living and well-being. So you might have to do it with a paper if you've got family members who would sort of poo-poo this exercise. But I think that the written exercise, the benefit of the written exercise is that it does make everybody's statements of equal worth and equal weight. And so that's a good thing.
And making our roles and our relationships and our stories in the family setting beget by caregiving shaped in so many ways we could not have anticipated. Making those explicit is helpful for us and others. And so there's a variety of ways to do that. And Don and I thank all of you for taking time to participate with us today and share your own wisdom. And we wish we could talk more, but we also recognize your time is so very valuable. Erin, I want to pass it off to you.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Dr. White. And thank you all so much for joining the webinar today.